My background is I've been a researcher for 15 years and a teacher, a lecturer at university, and written a book on zero waste fashion design with Timo Rissanen, who's from Finland. And yeah, I've been a design researcher that whole time. So hopefully the perspective I can bring to this discussion is slightly different to what you might get from other speakers. But if you have any questions at all, let me know. I'm going to put a download link to the slides of this presentation in the chat at the end of the discussion. So if you, so you can have a copy of the images and the references that I'm referring to. So sustainability in general has often been divided into a kind of like a lifestyle section and a technical solution area. And there's often a desire to eliminate any potential impact that sustainability and efforts around sustainability may have on aesthetic. There's a tendency also to seek drop-in technical solutions, that is, solutions we can just sort of drop into the existing linear system in order to sort of replace a bad way of working or a bad process with something that's better. And that's understandable because that takes potentially less effort rather than having to change an entire system. An example that I can give you from my own research, early on in my PhD, I did case studies with companies, international, very large companies, looking at ways of eliminating waste from their supply chain, pre-consumer waste. And one of the companies wanted me to work with their marker makers because that's where they thought the design waste, where the waste was produced in the marker making process. However, what I know from my previous experience is that it's the design process that makes that waste. And that links with what Matt's was saying, where 80% of the climate impact of a product is established at the design stage. So we can see that design has a really important role to play, but often it's largely kind of ignored or left in its own little box while people deal with technical issues, technical solutions to these problems. So in this presentation, I'm trying to, I guess, convince you that, that we need to include designers and design in the entire process. So in terms of longevity, what we need to seek is to change workflows, change processes and systems, because if you just change a product, the system itself will exert itself and will change back to what it was, and the change to the product is unlikely to last. I've seen this again and again. There are a lot of examples of individual products that maybe are a better example of what could be done, but because the system that they exist in hasn't been changed or adapted, they can't endure. So it becomes a one-off solution. So I would encourage all of you to take a long-term view of the company, a long-term view of all the products in use, and think about the relationship that design and that your company has to the products that you design beyond the point of sale. So how can you extend the life beyond that? So you've seen this already, and I'm not going to go into it at all, but one thing I will bring up is that there's some recent research in the Nature Sustainability Journal, which argues that all of these goals have a very anthropocentric or human-centric view, and that they kind of serve, if not used correctly, as a bit of a smoke screen that cloud you know, what the real problems are. It's kind of ironic because we view the circular economy and sustainability with a very anthropocentric lens, we actually miss addressing some of the biggest threats to our existence. This is an economic model that, if you haven't seen before, I'd recommend you read the book. It's by Kate Raworth, and she's sort of positioning the idea that all of our actions, design, production, marketing, everything that we do needs to occur within the planetary boundaries and social foundations, and currently they do not. Our current businesses, design and production models were developed at a time when we assumed that there was no limit to the capacity or the resources of the planet, and human rights violations were an accepted part of business. Obviously that has changed, but our model hasn't changed all that much. The way that we design, the way that we produce things hasn't radically changed in line with our changing worldview. So what can we do? If just over 80% of a garment's climate impact occurs during production, so it's fibre, yarn, fabric, wet treatment, cut and sew, and transportation for production, then we need to think about how the things that we design interact and interface with the production process. But you can also see on the right-hand side there that if we extend the life of a product, if we double its life in use, then you have a 49% reduction in climate impact. And so that's a massive reduction just by extending the life of products. So that's all about longevity. But this is, how do I say it? It will be halved by extending the life of a product. However, it's important to note that this only compounds into an overall positive impact if it leads to an overall drop in new fibre, material and product production. In real terms, that means a 50% drop in new fibre and new garment production. Greater efficiency, and that's where all of my research has been in. It's been in increasing the efficiency of products through design in terms of material use. And greater efficiency historically leads to greater production and greater consumption of new products, and it's a process called the rebound effect. And so it historically has led to any gains that we make in improving, how things are made, the kind of technical processes that we use. It all gets clawed back, and so you actually don't have any improvement in overall impact. So design can, in combination with systems, provide alternative solutions that maintain customer interactions and sales while decoupling this from material throughput. In addressing longevity, we need to change workflows, processes and systems, and you need to have this long-term view. If you take a singular approach, such as using organic cotton or recycled polyester, these are really good first steps, but they often fail to account for the complex interactions of the systems that surround both production and design, and also how individual citizens and consumers interact with that system. This is from the same research as Mestra, and it's by Kate Goldsworthy, Rebecca Early, and one other person whose name is escaping me at the moment. And they were looking at the relationship between material and product longevity and design, and what can be done in that space. So the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be kind of going through each of these and I'm going to give you tangible examples of what's been done in the space in terms of industry, but also in terms of research. So it's both things that are being done by companies in business, but also things that are being researched and are a little bit more kind of out there, pushing things a bit more. The good thing to kind of note is that product longevity, so the column that's on the left, that tends towards slow cycles. So if you think about circularity, it has potentially different speeds of cycles, and product longevity tends towards these very long cycles where maybe you design a garment or a product lifetime to last 50 years, thinking about how do you design for that length of time, versus material longevity, which tends to be a much shorter cycle, because it's about the longevity of the material itself, not necessarily the product. And so its cycle could be much quicker, recovering materials and recycling them into new ones. So, extending single user lifetimes. So this is probably the most obvious one when you think about longevity in terms of design. So it's how do you design for a long technical and aesthetic life? It's about functionally durable materials, maybe timeless style, but also the user, like the consumer actions of care and using repair services. So how do you design so that repairing it is easy? Perhaps consider things like replaceable parts, supplying kits to repair things with. And also material selection that facilitates repair. It's very difficult to repair a product if the material that it's made from just continues to fall apart because poor quality, not long-lasting material. And you could also think about changeable design. So that's either in its product or material or both. And so that those things are kind of internally facing actions. Those are things that in the context of a company, in terms of the design process, those are things you can do. But you also need to think about how that sort of interfaces externally. So in terms of labeling to encourage repair and to ensure correct laundering and care for products and things. And also maybe you provide a service that provides repair specific to your products. And I'm going to go through some examples, and you've probably seen, hopefully you've seen all of these, and none of this is new, because that would be great. But if it is new, then hopefully you'll get some ideas. So Patagonia, obviously a really great example of longevity in terms of design. And in terms of extending single user lifetimes, that's always been a core pillar of their sustainability sort of mission. And they do that by pairing timeless design of the individual products with really durable materials and also repair services. So this is a screenshot from a Patagonia generated page on ifixit.com, and so they have paired with existing platforms that provide guides for fixing things, and they've supplied the information for the consumers so that they know how to fix specific garments, outerwear, bottoms, tops, luggage, fasteners, all that kind of thing themselves. So this is giving agency to your consumer so that they can make those changes themselves. They also offer a service to where you can send in your product that's maybe broken or something, or you can take it directly to certain stores to get repaired for you. So both sort of led by the consumer where they repair it themselves, but also providing a service. Maybe they don't have the skills to do it themselves. And Nudie Jeans do a very similar kind of thing where they are looking at providing ways of extending the life of their products for the user. Denim has a really unique position in our culture whereby wear of a certain kind and repair is both celebrated and desired. In fact, how many jeans have we seen where they fake wear? That's a huge part of denim design. And so the kind of synergy, I guess, between denim and repair and long life is relatively straightforward and easy, but they ensure that the kind of materials that they use wear particularly well. I know I got some secondhand jeans which were from a high street brand originally, and the elastane in it sort of busted out and made it all bubbly and horrible looking. And with nudie jeans, they have a tendency to use lower amounts of elastane in their denim, which obviously impacts on things like comfort in terms of expectations of the consumer. But they're trying to ensure that their product has a long life and that they endure well beyond a normal lifetime. They also don't encourage you to wash your clothes, wash your jeans, because it'll wear them faster. Their website links to where you can get your jeans repaired, so that's what you're seeing here. You can locate a place close to you. They also have sort of links to associated repair places that already exist. So like Patagonia, nudie jeans use a whole suite of solutions that are related to the cultural value that their product has and the material and aesthetic longevity that it offers. And this one's from research that's happening at the Swedish School of Textiles by Erika Talman, who is looking at changeability as a quality in textile design. So this is pushing it out a little bit more, but it's something to consider. And it's linked with denim, because denim, as it ages, as it wears, it gains patina. And so she's looking at how do we kind of infuse or control that patina in particular materials. So in these cases, she's woven these samples with different material qualities and then aged them. So in some cases, like in the H example down the bottom here, that's been washed with black clothes to try and kind of soak up some of the colour that leaches out of black clothing sometimes when you wash it. Others have been left outside and yellowed in the sun. And so she's kind of approached the aging of these from a range of different perspectives as a way of bringing out the pattern that's embedded in it. So how can we kind of embed controlled change into the materials that we use? So from a textile design perspective, and then from like a form or a product perspective, how do you then utilize that in a product that's appealing to consumers? So product longevity, again, enabling multiple user lifetimes. So the focus here would be on things like brand leasing, clothing libraries, peer-to-peer sharing platforms, resale, charity, and branded resale. The kind of internally facing actions you need to take are things like models and logistics for collecting and redistributing products. So obviously you need to provide that kind of infrastructure to enable this to happen. And also designing your products from the outset so that they will kind of withstand this sort of interaction and ongoing life. Many products aren't designed at all beyond the moment they leave the hands of the retailer. You know, how they wear may not be even a consideration in some cases. So you need to design products for this kind of system so that it will continue to work with minimal sort of interaction required to refresh the pieces until absolutely necessary. Externally facing actions, thinking about, you know, an online or bricks and mortar context for interacting with consumers in terms of libraries or peer-to-peer sharing or branded resale. And also the kind of advertising or education of citizens to encourage this kind of approach is really important, because in many cultures it's seen as, you know, secondhand things are seen as a bit yuck. And so we really need to change and continue to move the space forward. I saw some research recently that said that they reckon by 2030, over 60% of all items in people's wardrobe will be secondhand. So there's a huge opportunity for brands here to take part in that secondhand market. And there's lots of examples already, lots and lots. So these are just a few. These are two examples of, one's a Swedish clothing leasing on a sort of startup setup with, that's on the right-hand side. And then on the left is Canada, the Canadian library, fashion library. And so think about how you can utilize these sorts of services. It depends on the sorts of products you offer. Usually, so far anyway, these are specifically tend to cater towards special occasions, so like weddings, events and things. So garments you might only wear once and that you may not want to keep, but less and less that's the case. The Swedish example, you can kind of lease your entire wardrobe and you return it after 3 to 4 weeks, or you can keep the bits that you want. So it's kind of like a rent to own sort of scenario there. And so how can you kind of use these sorts of systems to extend the use of garments, because the majority of garments after they're bought aren't worn, or they're worn 3 times, I think is the average. So as an industry, we really need to think about how we support multiple uses, multiple owners of the products that we produce. Given that 80% of the climate impact is caused in production, we need to improve how we produce, but also reduce production. But then how do we maintain interactions with consumers, sales in another way that doesn't require material throughput? Patagonia here again is another great example, as well as making durable garments in timeless styles that can be repaired, and they support that repair process. They also offer a resale platform for their products, and it kind of proves how durable these garments are and how enduring they are from an aesthetic perspective, because they can continue to sell them on and on. So they offer a platform to resell their customers' unwanted but still serviceable products, and if you do this, the consumer gets in-store credit for doing so, and you can post it in. You don't have to take it directly to a store. They offer a postal service for doing this, and then obviously quality control becomes really important. How do you ensure that the things that you are reselling in a way that's kind of attached to your brand still, how do you make sure that it's a good quality thing? So you need to have facilities for sorting and checking for quality control. And again, the design of the original product is really, really important. It has to be long-lasting materials that gain patina if they get kind of worn looking. The aesthetic needs to have some degree of longevity, or it's iconic, or it has value in some way that is ongoing. But I mean, even if it's not like that, just giving a garment another kind of run at life is going to be better than none at all. You might have seen the very, very recent news, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, where COS have started their own resale platform. If you go onto their website at the moment and try and buy anything, there's nothing there. It says, work in progress or coming soon or something. And it's a separate website. It's not part of their COS standard website. It's a completely separate one. I think it's called COSresell or something.com. And so the design of the product, again, in the case of COS and in Patagonia, it's important for similar reasons. Many of COS's pieces are considered timeless in their aesthetic, or they become semi-iconic. So it kind of has this really clear relationship between the aesthetic and also the material quality and the ability to on-sell these products. Again, nudie jeans, they on-sell worn jeans instead of as a way of avoiding commercial denim finishing methods. which tend to be quite damaging to workers and to the environment. There are some new ones which use like laser technology to finish the surface, which are looking really promising. But most conventional denim finishing methods are either very water intensive or are quite harmful to the workers who have to apply them. So Nudie, their consumers tend to fit into two categories. So they're either the users who love what's known as raw denim, super stiff, but almost untreated denim. And then when it gets too warm, they don't want it anymore. And so they can sell it back to Nudie, and then Nudie will on-sell it to their other part of their kind of customer that prefer a softer or a more worn look. And so it's kind of this symbiotic relationship between the different consumers and their brand, which I think is pretty nice. But again, denim is pretty special in that regard. Leather would be another one that's similar. Think about maybe linen to a certain extent, this ability to kind of, for patina to, for wear to be patina as opposed to damage. So yeah, again, materials become really important in this whole process. And this is, again, something that's a little bit more pushing the edge of things a little bit. So this is Lynn Talvod, who did her MA at the Swedish School of Textiles and Fashion Design, and it's her collection called Made to Fade. And so she designed these garments so that they could be printed with natural dyes at any stage in their life. So the design of them is that they can go flat to completely two-dimensional and then be printed and then be reformed into the garment. And so you can overprint and reprint, because she's looking at natural dyes, and so was trying to take advantage of the fact that natural dyes fade. Rather than trying to make natural dyes last, she's trying to say, well, it's okay that they fade. We're going to reprint, and it'll potentially extend the life of these pieces over time. There's similar research by Timo Rissanen, Linda Gross, and Vibeke Urisberg, who did a project with designing garments with evolving aesthetics in emergent systems. So they were looking at shirt design so that you can flatten it and reprint it to refresh the design, and therefore between users it could change its aesthetic, but also for one user, you could have the same garment base and that whose aesthetic changes with print or colour over its lifetime. All right. Product reconstruction and recycling. There's some really cool examples in this field. So obviously design methods and production processes to redesign products for resale and refreshment. So a little bit like the previous one that I just showed you, Lynn Talbot's work, but maybe more kind of destructive. So it's more about really taking the garment completely apart, cutting into it, and then remaking it into something else. It requires a relocalization of aspects of production. Like the scaling up of these methods is something that for a long time didn't really happen, but more and more you see examples of companies that are able to do this at a certain kind of scale. And in all the cases that I've found, it is localizing the production of and the design of some of these processes, and they have a team dedicated to this process. And the externally facing actions are things like, need collection facilities or garment drop off, or, you need some way of doing that. And then obviously also advertising. So again, Patagonia, they do this called Recrafted. And so they have new products and income streams, but not more material use. So they're taking garments that have been returned for repair or resale that are deemed too damaged to just sell as they are, and so they refresh them, they kind of splice garments together, they patchwork things, that kind of thing, and then sell them. You can see the prices are pretty comparable to the usual line. $57 for a t-shirt is not that much different to their regular t-shirt. and they have, you know, they're really careful to explain that there's aesthetic differences. You know, if you order that recrafted men's t-shirt, it won't look exactly like that, but the colors will be in this kind of realm, and so it requires a little bit of consumer education, for sure. Eileen Fisher is another wonderful example of this American sustainable brand. Excuse me. Again, it's kind of similar to Patagonia in terms of the process and how they approach it. They have a New York micro factory that is dedicated specifically to this and researching methods for upscaling how this is done. But you can currently buy garments that are a result of this method. And so again, their materials are very high quality. Their kind of consumer is really interested in sustainability, and so they're totally bought into the story already. They also, you can see on the left there, they have a very kind of strong research focus where they're trying to develop really new methods for making new materials out of old garments and that kind of thing. And so at the moment, a lot of that is too expensive to turn into a commercial garment product, but they sell them as artworks, and they're used to advertise and promote the more affordable methods that they're using, where they're kind of sewing parts of garments together and things. The strategy for Eileen Fisher and Patagonia is a relatively easy sell, because the design, aesthetic and price point meets expectations of their consumers. This is research from the Mesture project by Rebecca Early. It's called the Service Shirt. This is an even more kind of extreme example of, multiple lifetimes. So this shirt was designed for a 50-year life cycle. So imagine if our clothes lasted as long as the materials that they were made from. So it's made from synthetic, and then it gets overprinted multiple times, and then eventually in the 5th image along it becomes a lining of a coat, and then it gets turned into jewellery at the end there. And so the life cycle of this garment is imagined and designed from the outset to last 50 years. And I mean, maybe this is the kind of thing we need to be considering, and how do you kind of integrate service design into a process like this? So how do you design for the system, and then how do you ensure that the system can occur and kind of go through the whole process and be supported over 50 years? It's quite complex when you think about the realities of doing that. Maybe a company won't be in business in 50 years time. So yeah, it's a pretty out there kind of example, but I think this kind of long-term planning and thinking is something that's really important. This is a project that I did in 2015 in New Zealand for uniform upcycling, and it was really interesting for a number of reasons. So we were given corporate uniform waste, essentially, so uniforms that banks no longer needed because they changed their branding, or the person had left the workforce, and for security reasons they couldn't be resold. They had to be radically changed and be unrecognisable from their original form so that people couldn't impersonate a banker. And so it was a really interesting kind of process in terms of design, and we came up with a range of different methods for how to use these materials, but issues came up in that process with the design of the existing products that hindered their reuse. So, the material choices that they made, they used like a viscose knit, which wore terribly and just looked awful after a relatively short kind of life cycle. They used embroidery, which meant you had to cut it out because it had the logo on it and we need to make it anonymous. There were security risks with sort of special prints that made them identifiable as, a particular bank or a particular airline. And so we recommended that they changed their design process so that the waste that they generated at the, when they rebranded, or when someone left the company, that it could be better integrated into a waste stream and be reused in a better way. I mean, there are examples in Sweden. I know Cheap Monday did a project with the university, and they didn't use their own stock. I believe that they use unwanted workwear. And so there are these kinds of actions can be taken between brands as well, and not only within your own context. So it may be that the kind of materials that you use in your kind of production aren't suitable for this method, but you use them, you recover them in another way. But maybe you can pair up with another company to explore this, enabling multiple users. So material longevity. So this is kind of what Mats was touching on earlier. Fibre to fibre recycling, mixed fibre recovery, waste stream use. So using pineapple waste and things like that. And this tends to be very focused on technical solutions without design being particularly involved. But I would really encourage any company to involve designers, because we can help to sort of speculate, test and develop use, and also pinpoint avenues for exploration that maybe technical focused people wouldn't think of or see. And also thinking about how do you train or employ teams of people who can respond to these ways of thinking, and also just letting your consumers know what you're doing and what you're working on. So news cycle is a really great example. The material does apparently tend to be have quite a synthetic feel, and so they often blend it with virgin organic cotton. So they take things like jeans and sheets and cotton and turn it into essentially a regenerated cellulose kind of fibre, and then use it. And I've got an example later where it's been used. And then obviously Pinatex is a really cool example where the use of food waste, it's not food, but it's a byproduct of the production of the edible part of the pineapple, the fibre being turned into a leather-like replacement. The designing for recovery is a really interesting one from the perspective of designers. So how do you inbuilt design features to enable more efficient recovery, to support material recovery, design for disassembly, things like mono material use or biocompatibility. So it might be things like design for cyclability, use of mono materials, designing textiles for disassembly, and designing garments for disassembly. And so there's got to be systems for recapturing products, and again, education, external commitment to doing this. So this is from the Philippa K. Mistra Future Fashion collaboration, where they were looking at developing different speeds. So this is the Eternal Trench. It's made of 100% polyester, even the buttons, the thread, everything is 100% polyester, so that it can be recycled. Polyester is often used in really cheap garments or products because it's cheap, and but it's our longest lasting material, so it kind of doesn't make sense that we use it for things that people throw away, unless we can really adequately recapture it and ensure that we don't get microplastic shedding, which is a growing problem, I think, in the use of polyester. It's a real conflict. Like, it's really tricky, I think, between polyester is by many measures a really great material to use in terms of its long life, and you can recycle it and things, but then we don't really know how to control for microplastic shedding and the impact that they may have on ecosystems, our own biology. But it's just, there's so many unanswered questions regarding polyester. So this is an example of the news cycle fibre being used with Stella McCartney and Adidas, where it's been designed for circularity. So in terms of the design, beyond the use of the fibre, you'll notice that there's no hardware on this hoodie. So there's no eyelets in the hood, and there's no like little metal or plastic dangly bits at the end of the toggle. And even to the point where the Stella McCartney and Adidas logo aren't printed on, that it's a jacquard knit, and so it's been knitted into the material itself. They only made very short runs of this, I assume because they can't maybe produce at scale the fibre yet, because, you know, in terms of the production of the garment, it's nothing particularly new in that regard. This is a little bit more sort of research-driven stuff. So this is Letitia Forst, who is looking at designing textiles for recovery. So separating stretch from non-stretchy materials. So basically trying to deal with the problem of elastane, you know, comfort being embedded into the yarn itself. So how can we separate it out and still have, you know, really beautiful looking textiles? Reducing production impacts. This is actually where most of my research is situated. So vertical manufacturing, redistributed local manufacturing, automation, regenerative agriculture and microsystems, use of non-wovens, long-term investment, and even immaterial design, which I'll get to in a bit. So examples in this field, so on Unmade is a really cool example where they've looked at developing systems for producing on demand. It's fully finished knitted goods, so it's not 3D knitted, but it's fully fashioned knitted pieces. You customize the design yourself, so the consumer using the app can control, you know, where the color is positioned or the print or what scale it is, that kind of thing, and the size as well is controlled. And they do this for other brands, so they have these kind of pop-up factories that enable users to go in and order a jumper or a hat or a scarf or whatever, and then it gets produced for them that day. So it's very, very fast turnaround on demand manufacturing. This is from, so the previous example was in knit. I want to give you a knit, a non-woven and a woven example. So this is non-woven. This is Kate Goldsworthy laser line, the laser line monotee, this particular example. So it's produced directly from a non-woven material, which is less intensive production than knit or woven due to the reduction in steps. Basically, there's no spinning. So all of the spinning climate impacts are removed. The garment is finished on a flatbed digital laser bed, and the surface that you see is produced by bonding two layers of non-woven textiles together. So it's not printed on, it's not dyed, it's just bonding two layers of textiles to a greater or lesser degree, so you can see the underlying colour more or less, and it gives that lace-like effect. And then it's constructed using ultrasonic welding, so there's no stitching, there's no thread, and it can be done in a single step, although this particular one had two sequential steps. You can see here they did finishing and then they constructed it. This is my research, so I'm looking at the production of garments on the loom. So you don't cut and assemble, you weave the form in the fabric itself, and then you cut and it becomes a form. So these trousers were woven on a standard jacquard loom, and then a cut, and only require a zipper to be inserted, and that's it. So with this one, it's highly efficient and very cost effective, even if you weave these at a really high-end Europe-based weaving mill, which these were woven in the Netherlands. The cost per unit can be as low as €10, and that includes all production and material production as well. And then going really out there, just for a bit of fun, this is Diane Shearer. So she's looking at the ability to grow materials. So how do we kind of really rethink this whole system? So this is a dress that's been grown in the root system of grass. Amazing. Blows my mind. And then again, like, what about in material design, if you haven't heard of Dress X, or seen the example from Balmain from a couple of seasons ago, where so the image on the left hand side there, that's not real at all, not even close to being real. The models are completely digitally fabricated and the garments are digitally fabricated. And then now in Dress X, you can buy garments digitally, and they superimpose them on an image of yourself that you provide, and you can use that to post to social media, instead of buying a garment, wearing it a couple of times to post on social media and then throwing it away. So there's these kind of other approaches to ideas of longevity. Maybe we don't need to produce as much at all. So I guess there's the question earlier about, traceability, like how do we know about chemicals that go into this? So there's some really, really interesting work that's been done. I mentioned Eon, which is led by an American woman, Natasha Frank. And so that project is working with Microsoft to develop ways of digitally identifying and connecting everyday products using the Internet of Things. And so it's basically using Industry 4.0 to connect information about products over their entire life cycle. But I would argue that the products themselves need to be designed so as to activate really meaningful and appropriate action and use. I don't think we can just sort of tag this kind of stuff at the end and assume that if we know what went into it, everything's going to be fine, because it's more about knowing what's in it, or changing what we do and how we produce the kind of chemicals that we use, so that we can extend the life of these, we can remake things, and we know that it's going to be safe in terms of their ongoing use. So it's basically traceable transparency within the business itself, but also externally facing to your consumers and any future remaker who might remake your things that you've made in the future. Many of these approaches are very compatible with each other, and the benefits will compound. Like if you take long-lasting materials and you pair that with a very long life cycle, obviously that has a really nice synergy. But there are also examples where they're at odds with each other, and you've got to be really careful to ensure that compatible approaches are taken. So you really just need to consider the relationship between materials and timescale, and also how you collaborate between technical fields and design to ensure that that's done really well. There's a few frameworks that I'd recommend you kind of have a look at and think about. This is one that I like to use in my research. So how do you transition from what we have and the way we work now into what we want? How do you identify what you want? How do you ensure that the steps you take now are going to lead to the kind of change that we need? And how do you ensure that that transition is just and fair, that kind of thing. I won't go into these now because I see the time, like I said, I'll post a link to this whole presentation in the chat, and you can in your own time have a think about these things. So it's like, the problem evolution is how do we get to here on a company level? Like how and why is your company currently the way that it is? And then what's the current issue? What do you currently do? What are the products currently used and designed? What's the design process? What's the relationship between departments? It's kind of like looking at how things are, and then adopting a transitional posture. So what kind of sort of attitude do you want to have going into this, or position or opinion or aim, I guess, and then looking at the particular methods that you could use, from things that I've shown you and other things that you'll see throughout today. What are the most viable for your company? And then what do you need to do to change in order to do that? Who needs to be involved? What is the motivation? How much time do you have? What knowledge base do you have? How flexible are you? And is there buy-in across the entire production chain? That's it. I'm done.